I mean, I think that what specifically about dance, I think that what is the question of directing the eye and the focus on the figure is even stronger
Hmm.
than in the theater. Often also just because the reality is in dance, very often you have a more open stage.
Hmm.
It's not always true, but often true, that you've
Yeah.
just often got a bigger, more open stage. And so the constructing of space is much more projection's job than if
Sure.
there's a big set on stage.
Right.
Um, and so that and so I think that that's one of the things that's specific about it. I also think there's an even greater degree of freedom
Hmm.
in dance uh, because as a form, it's more abstract, right? You know,
Yeah.
it's like if you're in the theater, there's you're still kind of like held by these sort of some necessities of like realism and physical space and like people need chairs to sit on and things like that. Um, which seem endlessly frustrating to me, but
Right.
um, whereas dance, I think that you also have your audience is more open, right?
Hmm.
So that it's a more abstract form so that I think, you know, pairing image and movement becomes a much freer sort of undertaking.
Sure.
Um, and an audience is more willing to accept those things. I think the other thing that's incredible that I love to do, and it's not easy, but it's really some of the, I think, exciting place for dance is looking at the relationship between motion and image and motion in of the figure. And I think there's a bunch of ways to attack that. I had a great time on the last piece I did with Bill T. Jones, which was in the Park Avenue Armory, which is like a giant, giant, giant venue, like an entire city block sized room. And there was a company of 10 dancers on a floor that was the size of a city block.
Yeah.
And um, and what we did in that case was a very technologically sort of advanced approach, but it spoke to something. It's like we were allowing the dancers to actually draw lines on the floor. So we could say, well, this dancer is in one spot and this other dancer is in another spot. And as they move in relation to each other, they'll cast a line on the floor
Hmm.
all the way across this space.
Right.
Right. So it was like a finding a way to embody their actual movement
Right.
in image. And
Wow.
that one was generative and that's like complex. But even looking in a prepared way about like, well, this is what the choreography is and how can an image respond to their motion or their choreography. I also think in dance, it's often about like thinking about it like dance, like, oh, this is a duet
Right.
between the dancers and the image, and finding time and space in both of those things. Whereas like when is the image leading and the dancers following, and when is it vice versa? I think the real challenge to that is that the best version of that work is when all of those things can be developed simultaneously.
Sure.
And that's, whereas in a theatrical context, I think it's in theater, it's easier to sort of like break everything apart and we're like, okay, we're going to rehearse in the rehearsal room and then we're going to plan it and then we're going to tech the show and things like that. In dance, I think that the the most successful versions are where image and choreography are really looked at the same time.
Right.
Um, but we've done very simple things like we're in a rehearsal room, make sure it has shades and point a projector at the wall. And it's not
Hmm.
necessarily that it's simulating the shape of the ultimate stage picture, but just the images and the choreography are in the room at the same time. And I
Right.
can look at the wall over there and I can look at the choreography and I can experience them at some of the same times. So I think that a good um, a good lesson in that is like how to be part of those conversations early and how to sort of find a way to be in the room with that. I find that choreographers more than most, but it's true I think of directors as well, they're going to solve they're going to solve the problem with the tools that are in the room
Right.
and they're going to make something with what they have.
Right.
Um, we all do that. right? I mean, I find when I'm designing projection, I'm like, oh, right. And when I get to the theater, it's like, oh, I didn't need to do that. The actors are doing that. I like
Yeah,
like swatting things away because I've been making the entire show.
right,
I've been
right,
making a complete show as a projection designer. And then I get to the theater, is what I was saying at the beginning. And then I get to the theater and I'm like, oh, there's actors here.
right, right,
Get rid of that, get rid of, like I start cutting it back. And that's natural. But I think that finding a way to get into those conversations in rehearsal, particularly in dance, is really key. Um, and I think that's when the possibility of the tools open up
right.
is when you're in the room, in rehearsal, in that moment of creation.
Hmm.
Um, and my most successful projects like that that's been the case.